Good afternoon, good morning, whatever time of day it is that people are watching today. Welcome to Resonate, where I, Phil Stokes, I'm just chatting to friends and colleagues here in London and around the world to find out a little bit more about what God is doing in the realm of mission, discipleship, church planting specifically. And today I have a fabulous friend and colleague who works with me in the London Pioneer Network, Ioannis Dekas, and I'm going to be asking him a little bit about what he's doing, because he's planted a church online, and he's done it. One minute he said he was going to do it, and the next minute it's up and running. So I know with Yanni, he's he's highly intentional individual. And Yanni, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Phil. Thank you for your kind words and your kind introduction. It's a joy and a privilege for me to be with you here on Resonate, and just to be a small part of what God's doing through your life. It remains an honor and a joy for me. So thank you for inviting me into this space.
Mate, you've always been an inspiration. You know, I just watch what you guys are doing over there in West London.
Yep.
And picking up what's going on around the world through the wider network of Doxa Deo. And it's always just so challenging and inspiring. The one thing we do have in common from way back is that we're both worship leaders turned church planters, aren't we?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a good testimony in the sense of church, worship leader turned church planter, but it is so. Life for me started out, ministry life started for me out as a worship leader. I've been leading worship I almost want to say as long as I can remember, although that wouldn't be entirely true, but it has been a huge part of my life. It was also the access point for both Sheree and myself when we became part of the Doxa Deo family 24 years ago. And then subsequently moved to London 14 years ago. And in that moment, there was a bit of a transition, moving out of, just day-to-day leading teams of people that were leading worship into something more of, the church planting role, which has been both incredible, incredibly frustrating. It's had the highest of highs, some pretty deep lows in between. But that's I suppose, that comes with the territory as a church planter. But it is so, I think that's perhaps what's always been an incredible platform for our friendship, was this just a sense of worship and, a deep sense of appreciation for who God is through music.
Absolutely. Just that connection point. It's our hearts really as church planters to connect people with the intimate relationship they can have with God. I'm just really curious about this online planting idea. I would probably be called a digital immigrant, not a digital native. So from the point of view of doing things online, it's clearly something which I think is new to some of our generation, but people are just trying to do that and get to grips with it. I guess my first question is why online? What's going on that it's such an important discussion to be having and a thing to be doing?
Yeah, obviously, on the first or second weekend in March last year, the entire world's churches moved online within the space of 3 or 4 days. And, I suppose for some of us, we might have been carrying around the idea or the notion of trying out a digital ministry. But the way that the COVID pandemic actually forced us into that was a fascinating moment. I'll never, ever forget that first week of lockdown in the UK last year. It was the most dreadful of days. The hours and hours and hours I just sat behind the computer trying to figure out how we were going to make ministry happen the next Sunday. So, but perhaps just a little bit of background. Sheree and I planted an in-person congregation, an in-person church in London, in the western part of London, a number of years ago. And it's obviously this church that Sheree and I were still actively engaged in leading. And then having gone from an in-person experience to suddenly finding ourselves, online. I think that was obviously one of the bigger catalysts. But it is also so that I suppose we as a ministry have been using technology for quite some time, through Facebook, through Instagram, and a lot of different ways, because we felt that this was a great marketing tool. And, initially this was what was in our thinking. We'd use Facebook to market the local church. Hopefully people would discover that and then join us on a Sunday in the building. And that was some of our thinking at that stage. But, with the start of lockdown, a lot of things changed in the way we thought about ministry. Suddenly finding ourselves in a space where we could minister to people live. There were prayers happening, there was communion happening, there was prayers for baptism in the Spirit that was happening. It suddenly so deeply challenged us. And there was I had a time at the beginning of lockdown last year where I started considering what happened in Genesis to Adam and Eve. When they were in the garden, this was what they knew. This was the life they knew. And then suddenly finding themselves outside of the garden with all of life that they didn't know. And I wondered, such a lot in that season, what was it like for them outside of the garden in week 1? And what was it like in month 2? And how did it feel a year down the line? What changed in their thinking? And it was fascinating to just go back and read that story and to, by Genesis chapter 4, start reading how industrious the human spirit is in a time of challenge. You don't have to read till Genesis 20 before you see that there are cities and that there's ingenuity and there's farming and there are musical instruments and there's culture and there's something industrious about the human spirit that thrives and flourishes in the midst of challenge.
Yes.
And that to me was a huge catalyst. We started asking ourselves very early on in the journey, not what have we lost, but what can we do with what we have? And that was quite a big turning point for me in the journey.
Great. It's that necessity is the mother of invention phrase, isn't it? That we often use here.
Yeah.
We don't really know what we can do until we actually have to do it. But, I think that when you combine that with someone who's quite innovative as yourself, then I think that what we're seeing is something emerging, and it's happening all over. But your story is very interesting to me. So, because what you did, you transitioned immediately the leadership of your church plant to someone and gave your full attention to this.
Yeah. So it didn't happen immediately, but there were two catalysts for me. The one was I started a devotional on my Facebook page in April last year. And it was fascinating to see the impact of this devotional. So I was no longer using Facebook as a platform to try and get people into a building. It had gone from social media to social ministry. And so this devotional that started on my Facebook page that had varying numbers of people view it. I mean, sometimes there were hundreds of people viewing a post. Other times there were thousands of people. I mean, like up to 20,000 people. It was a crazy season. But there's two things that happened in that full. The first one was I got a Facebook message off a lady from Jamaica who started messaging me saying, listen, I've been following you for a while now on social media, downloading sermons off the internet and stuff. So this was even before COVID hit. And so she said that she was going through a personal crisis. She had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And she started quoting things that when I read that, I recognized, hang on a minute, this sermon I preached 6 years ago.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I contacted her and we started a discussion on Facebook where I realized that what I thought was social media to this woman was actually social ministry. There was ministry happening to her life. That was the first thing. The second thing was, it was a lady in the very southern tip of the United Kingdom whom I'd never met before. And she started contacting me and saying, listen, this is what I'm going through. Will you pray for me? Look how God has answered this prayer. A few posts later, and it suddenly opened my mind to this understanding of, I've been thinking of Facebook and just a way and a means to get people into a physical space, instead of recognizing the real power behind this to be a catalyst, and more than just a catalyst for ministry. How could I potentially create family from this?
Yeah.
And it was that moment that changed our thinking and that opened our minds to that. And so in August last year, we sat down as a team, and we said to each other, listen, this is happening. Why is this happening, and what should we be doing about it? And it was at that stage that we then made the transition. And one of our other leaders who's on staff with us, we started positioning him to play a greater role in our in-person expression here in London, which is still online, by the way. It still hasn't gone back to in-person, but it will, and it will soon, hopefully. And we know that there will be something of a hybrid model there, where we'll be doing some things online and we'll be doing some things in person. But in September last year, then we said, okay, let's take the bold step. And we started thinking of this as one ministry unit, and thinking of planting a second ministry unit, which was solely online. And in October last year, that's where the online campus then physically launched. But by that time, we had so much, I suppose, local intelligence and knowledge about how, platforms that we could be using and ways that we could be doing this, that it was a very easy transition for us just to launch that. Although, I mean, planting a church is always scary, and there's always risk involved, and there's always, you're always doing something that somebody has never done before in that geographical space. This was just a non-geographical space. And so it came with all of that territory, but we managed to launch an online campus, an online ministry in October last year.
And so how many folk have you got kind of viewing and stepping into that?
So currently we have anything between 65 and 80 devices that connect on a Sunday. And then there is a number of people that still view, all the way through YouTube in the week. So 80 devices, they say, times 2.8. I mean, it's that opens up a whole new discussion, and which I don't think is necessary for this, for where we are, and perhaps what the listeners would like to hear from this discussion. But at the moment,
your point is important, though, isn't it? Is that everything we do online has a continuing impact, and you already mentioned that really with this lady in Jamaica, and made that point. That stuff that we produce that's digital is actually going on. It's going ahead of us, moving on behind us.
It's both scale and longevity that I think it suddenly opens up for us.
Yes. I mean, I'm going to show my age here now, because Winky Prattney, probably about 18 or 20 years ago, said, we need online evangelists, we need online pastors, we need online prophets, apostles, teachers. We need people to be transferring their gift and calling into this digital medium. And he's a prophet, and he was speaking, but who knew that we would all be propelled as we have been in this recent season. And essentially, I think what people have discovered is that the internet is the equivalent of the first century Roman road. This is one kind of illustration that somebody shared with me, and I thought that's brilliant. That's exactly what it was. I'm not sure the first century church really appreciated that the Roman roads were such a missional vehicle. And until they were forced to go down them, partly fleeing from persecution. But the reality is that we feel a little persecuted in the situation that we're in, if not biologically. But we're being forced down this new Roman road of the internet. Anyway, so you pivoted, and you managed to not just change what you're doing, but to start something new. And I'm really interested in what who is your demographic if you're planting a church normally, you kind of set out a clear pattern, don't you? Say, well, we're going to reach this group of people in this area or this particular demographic.
Yeah.
What was your planning in that process? Who did you see yourself as reaching?
We set ourselves some clear parameters in our head. We said 25s to 55s, living in cities, multi-ethnic, globally.
Wow.
That's how we started out. That's what we said. You know, we probably wouldn't be able to reach kids at the moment with our capacity. And over 55s might not fall into our demographic just because of their capacity with digital, environments. And I'm not saying 55 is the top scale of that. We just had to have some kind of a parameter. But here was the important thing. I think more than anything of those elements that I've just mentioned, I think the one thing that we said is the type of person that we would want to reach is the person who would want to make a difference in their community and their city. We call them city changers.
Okay. Well, this is quite interesting. So this a little bit more. So you're not just reaching anyone anywhere. You're looking for people who will be quite intentional in the way they engage with what you're doing.
Yeah. And that was important for us, Phil, because I think there are other models of online ministry out there. One very clear and a very strong leader in the field is somebody like Life Church with Craig Rochelle. But their model is much stronger from an evangelistic point of view. Their heart, their whole drive, the way they package their services, the types of things that they offer online, it's really to reach people who have never made a firm commitment to Jesus Christ. And we realized that whilst that would be a very important part of our journey and our mission, we made it very clear from the beginning that the outcome of this would not just be to bring people to Christ, but to really disciple people in a way that would lead them into something of an understanding of how they can make an impact in their local community and in their city. And that to us, that is hearing stories of community or city transformation. That would be the litmus test for us, whether this was really a successful venture or not. And the reason why that is important for us, and I suppose for this conversation even, is because the digital environment is content saturated.
Yes.
You could, on any given day, you don't even have to wait until Sunday. You can go and listen to the best preachers with the best content, with the best, if you want your life deeply charged up, and if you're struggling with something, there's content out there to find it. You're going to find it and be able to, but we didn't want to be that church. We weren't looking for people that would just come online to look at a service. We were looking for people that would engage a process of becoming a city changer where they are.
So two things there. One is that I noticed that you didn't just plant an online church, you actually formulated a clear vision of your demographic before you went online. I think is very helpful. So you were actually making it a clear demographic choice again, because I think a lot of people assume if we go online, it's the whole internet. Potentially. And
it is so, but I think even online, you can't be everything to all people. It's not possible.
So tell me a little bit more briefly about, before we get back to the digital challenges and practical stuff of it, but explain to me, city changers, what that demographic is. How would you define a city changer?
So in order to, I suppose, if you really want to understand how we think about it, I'll have to take you a little bit back to the Doxa Deo story, if I may, just in a few sentences. Doxa Deo started off 25 years ago in the city of Pretoria in South Africa. I didn't start Doxa Deo, but I came on to staff with them very early on in the journey. So I really saw how the plan of God unfolded into something of a global movement, so started off in one single church that really had a sense, seeing God was saying to them as a church, I've given you faith for this church, but I've also given you faith for a city. And that, just in that one statement, there's so much in our thinking that changes, because you're making a lot of power shifts in that moment. You're going from thinking just, how do I do programs for people at a church so that they can come to something, to understanding that this group of people is actually God's program. God wants us to not just pastor a church, but he wants us to pastor a geographical space. Another power shift that we had to go through is we had to stop being concerned about our city and really start having compassion for our city. You see something of that in the story where Jesus multiplies the fish and the bread, where the disciples ask, they say the people are hungry. And that's a lot of times what we as the church or Christians do. We're good at pointing our problems to God. And he says, well, you give them something to eat. And so we had to go from concern to compassion. We had to understand that we had to go from egocentric to ecosystem, because we were not going to be the only church in that, geographical space that was going to make a difference. But how could we take hands across boundaries, across ministries with other people and organizations to see the transformation of our city come about? And it also gave us a clear view of the fact that, a church was not just about a gathering of people who would worship together and receive the word, but it was also about mobilizing the church into different spheres of society. So whether it be government or education or business or the arts and entertainment or media or sport. And all of those things changed in our thinking when it went from faith for a church to also faith for a city.
Yeah. Well, that's a massive paradigm. I mean, that from a perspective of missional intentionality is another big discussion altogether, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is.
So if I'm thinking, I want to raise a city changer online, in the simplest form, there are three elements to that. Firstly, knowing God. It's about discovering how our identification with Christ really impacts us. It's about understanding intimacy with God. He's not far. He's right here in my life. And it's about understanding something of an integrous living. How does the concept of knowing God play itself out in all of my life? But it's more than just knowing God. It's also about loving people. So it's about understanding how my life can reach within the concept of relationship. It's about understanding my calling. It's about understanding my contribution from a stewardship of life point of view. And then lastly, it's not just about knowing God or loving people. It's about impacting my world. How does my worldview impact my living? How does, how does my workplace translate into a place of mission? And so if you put all three of these elements together, somebody who deeply embraces and lives that's when city transformation, I think, really starts for us.
Yes. I mean, you touched on the phrase worldview there, which is a massive
absolutely
kind of underlying discussion and challenge that for this cultural moment is a big one, as we seek to be people of good news. And I think I probably would want to come back to you and do another resonate on that one alone. But just for the sake of our listeners here, let's look at the digital challenge of going online for a moment. And I just want to ask you how you did it. What were the means by which you took what you're doing, and what was the cost? Let's get down to basics here. What did it cost you physically, emotionally, financially, in any other way? What was the process and the challenges in that?
So the easiest place to start off with that is right here. This is where it started off, with an iPhone, literally. It's the way technology has developed, Phil, really makes our capacity to be able to do something like this very quick and rather cost effective just as far as, money resource is concerned. And if people wanted to know more or explore more about that, we use a few basic platforms. I suppose if people wanted to know, we use the Life Church platform for our Sunday services. So
lifechurch.com, is that, or what is it?
Oh, I can't remember. I think it's online.church. I think
online.church.
Yeah, online.church. So you go on, you register. It's a free resource. They give it away for free.
I'll put that in the link for the video.
Yeah, they give it away for free. What it does is it allows people to broadcast either an absolutely live service, which we don't do at the moment, but it also allows you to do live hosting. So we have people online on Sundays who are actually hosting our services live. They'll be chatting, they'll be praying for people. Just last Sunday, we had a lady who came and she logged in from Zambia. And the previous week, she had been struggling with terrible migraines because of stress in her personal situation. And she'd been struggling with that for months. One of our online hosts prayed for her last Sunday, and she was instantly healed. And so just last Sunday, she came back to testify, to say, listen, as this person was praying for me, God healed me. So it's very interactive, very live, although the service itself, because it's broadcast a number of times during the day, we pre-record that. But the way to do that is very cheap. I mean, you can record with an iPhone, and you can use the YouTube platform, which is also free, and link that back into the Life Church platform. I mean, as far as the technical aspects of it, it's actually very, very cheap to do. We've now obviously learned, and we've started investing a little bit of money, and people have started, felt that they wanted to help us. So we've got a nice little camera, again, not too expensive. And we bought 2 lights that help in a lot of different ways. But really, it's as easy as starting with an iPhone. I think the cost for us on other levels was more expensive. Yeah, it was more expensive. I think for us as a family, we had to rediscover rhythms of life.
Okay.
Because now all of a sudden, mom and dad were in the studio on a Thursday, for a number of hours, busy recording, busy prepping. We also discovered that video editing is an extremely taxing part of it. If I can encourage you, I would rather use my iPhone to record a service and outsource the editing as a cost factor before I go for an expensive camera and then actually not have the capacity to edit that, because that was, the time constraints were enormous for us in the early days.
So outsourcing the editing, you're saying finding somebody with the digital skills to put together what it is that you're after from the material that you've generated.
Yeah.
So somebody who's a digital native, you pay them to do that work. Yeah. And you're saying that's more cost effective than investing in lots of expensive equipment.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Very good point.
You're going to do 2 things. You're going to drain yourself, which I did in the beginning, because I had to. We had to, as a team, we had to. Between Matt and myself, that was the drain. I mean, we spent hours and hours and hours producing content, which we then had to edit and make sure that it was packageable. Until we found an avenue, and again, there's very easy, cost-effective ways of doing that. We outsourced that, and it's taken so much pressure off us, and we can actually start focusing again on building relationships, which is obviously the important part of it. I think the other thing that was quite a big challenge for us was we as a family had to find out how we were going to do church. And if I can just say, we're not the type of people that think church is a building. Okay, church is people, but we as a family had to find out how we were going to celebrate. Because now on a Sunday morning at 7:30, I'm hosting our first service. Sheree's hosting the 10 o'clock service, and somewhere in between the kids are. And we as a family had to find a rhythm of saying, okay, how are we going to use communion? How are we going to engage? How are we going to connect our kids into what we were busy with and keep them aligned to what God was doing in our family?
This is going to be a bit of an ongoing big discussion, isn't it, for those people who are doing digital, predominantly digital online ministry.
Absolutely.
How do we, what does community or family on mission look like if this is what God's called you to?
Yeah. And I think we know some of the answers, but we certainly have more questions at the moment than what we have answers for. I think very early on in the journey, Phil, we had to realize and recognize that there are the people behind the screens, if you can see people coming online and stuff, we have to recognize these are real people, real people with real struggles, and we had to make sure that in absolutely everything that we were doing, that would be our approach, and also to continuously remind them that we are real people on this side of the screen.
Yeah.
So we did two things. We firstly introduced something called a meet and greet. So every Monday, because we're working across time zones, in our time zone on a Monday morning and on a Monday evening, Sheree and I have a 45-minute Zoom with open invitation to absolutely anybody that connects to the online platform to join us for a Zoom.
Okay.
And all that we do is we just visit with people. We find out who they are, where they come from, how can we serve them better, what are the things that they need, how would their lives flourish better because of their connection to the Doxa Deo online campus. So that's the first thing we did. And the second thing we did is we started life groups. So you can go to our website, you can sign up for a life group. We have life groups in Nepal, we have a life group in India, we have a life group in Australia, we have a life group in South Africa. And what we do then outside of our normal rhythms is to actually spend quite a lot of our time and investment with these life group leaders at the moment, because those are our first points of discipleship, really.
Yeah.
And so we're investing quite a lot of time into that relationship and building those relationships strong, because as people start connecting into the process, we trust God that will transfer and replicate and reproduce into those environments.
It does seem to me that you've given kind of due consideration to that whole discipleship process, and I guess that's an ongoing thing, isn't it? How do we do content, curriculum, community, coaching that builds meaningful discipleship, as opposed to simply an inspirational boost?
Yes.
Which is the old consumer thing, which we can do.
People have asked me. Are people that watch the service or engage the service, are they constant? Do they drop in and out? And I'm thinking to myself, that happens to people in person.
Yeah.
This is not an online thing.
Well, it's not. No, it's not.
The fact that they're sitting in front of you in the building doesn't mean anything.
Absolutely. Very good point.
Yeah.
I think we probably should land this a little bit, but I just wonder, in terms of how we, where does this sit in relation to other inline gatherings in terms of church? What do you see, as the relationship between the online and the in-gathered in buildings kind of context?
I think there are three layers to this. I think the first layer is those churches and those church leaders who are hoping to go back to something that they had pre-COVID, and they've used digital just as a bridge in the season, and they're going back to in-person, and that's going to be the end of their digital engagement. I don't personally feel that's necessarily the way to go. And it might be that somebody's watching this thinking, I don't have the resource to do that, or and resource is not just money, it's actually time and energy and capacity and knowledge, resource, all of that put together. I would encourage somebody like that to really trust God to see how they can keep something of an online presence, because here's what I think the second layer is going to be: those that are going to go back to in-person and keep something of an online presence, whatever shape or form that takes on. It's interesting for me, within the London context, our in-person, our on-site gathering or campus here we're just looking and seeing at the moment that I think some of our impartation and our connection is going to happen in person, but a lot of our training has happened online, and I'm not sure that's going to change again.
Wow. Yeah.
I think a lot of our equipping processes is still going to happen online. And so I think there will be something of a hybrid in the future.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly important and necessary for churches to explore that. And then, here we are chartering a whole new way. I think we're not the only ones. There are other churches across the world that are doing that. But the reality is, I think there will be more models in the future that will be just online. Do I think these stand in opposition to each other? Absolutely not. I think we're on the same mission. We're building the same heart to see the glory of God come all across the world in whatever spaces there are. I think what the online opportunity is for us, I remember as a youth pastor a number of years back in Cape Town. It wasn't so long ago. But I remember as a youth pastor, we would rally the teenagers in a little minibus, and we'd go from door to door, where they knew their school friends were living, and we'd knock on those doors and we'd spread the gospel in that sort of way. And, you don't almost need to do that anymore. Most, if not all people have at least one of these. Some people have two of these. And if we can find ways, whether we're in person or completely online, just to make our way onto this little device for every individual that is in our city and in our community. It's absolutely crazy. It's an incredible opportunity.
It is an incredible opportunity. That's a great place for us really to learn this conversation. Yanni, you are, as I said at the beginning, an inspiration, and we're absolutely thrilled to see what's going on through. What do you call the online campus? What's the name?
We just call it Doxa Deo online campus. The URL goes under doxadeo.church.
Okay. It is what it says on the tin. Yeah.
It is absolutely what it says on the tin.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can find doxadeo.church or Doxa Deo online campus. You can find our website, our Facebook page, our Instagram page. There's a lot of different ways to connect with us if you wanted to check it out a little bit more. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Yanni, for talking to me, and I'm looking forward to further conversations and seeing what God does across London through this particular conversation through the Reach London network, and hearing a little bit more what others are doing. Awesome. So bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sheree and the kids, and we'll see you soon.
Bless you. Thank you so much.
Bless you, my friend.
Take care.